writing about a drink that doesn't exist anymore in Mexico, but it exists in the Philippines. So I said, no, I need to go before I finish my book. There is this forgotten history that we need to reintroduce to the audience, the importance of history between both countries.
It's been quite the journey that has led me to you. When I first started this discovery process, I never thought that it would take me to the places that it has. There are things that I'm like, okay, yeah, I want to do this, but then there are so many things that I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to Mexico, and I guess that has a very strong connection and history there that I wasn't expecting.
Mabuhay, and welcome back to the channel. I am so excited to introduce you to Doctora Paulina Machuca, an award-winning professor at El Colegio de Michoacán in Mexico. Before my recent trip to Mexico City, I discovered Professor Machuca's research about the forgotten history that closely ties together the culture and traditions of the Philippines with Mexico. Her work is actually what inspired me to visit Mexico in the first place. I get to visit her hometown of Colima, which according to Dr. Paulina, has many Philippine influences, which you're going to hear about in this episode. And while you listen to our enlightening and heartwarming conversation, I'd like to share some footage I took during my visit to Mexico City, a place that is as vibrant as its people and our shared history.
I'm really curious to know, what brought you to study this connection between the Philippines and Mexico?
I told you I was born in Colima and I grew up in Colima. And Colima is called La Ciudad de las Palmeras, like the city of the palm trees. The two symbols of identity of any people from Colima are the volcano and the coconut palm tree. The palm tree is as important as our volcano. Our typical drink is the tuba. Even the word tuba, many people in Colima didn't know that it's a Philippine word. And the palapa, we call palapa to the roof of the houses on the coast. And they didn't know that the word palapa is not Mexican, it's not from Europe, it comes from the Philippines. We have a lot of Philippine influence, and the people start to know because I give many conferences and I tell them, the coconut palm tree is not native and the tuba is not native. First, they see me like this, no? When I was a teenager, I really liked history and I decided that I wanted to be a historian. And I remember I read a book. It was a small book that talked about some Filipinos in the 17th century that made the Lambanog, the Vino de Cocos. But the Vino de Cocos is not produced anymore. It's not produced after the 18th century. So it was something really, really far from us. So when I read that and I said Filipinos in Colima and the Vino de Cocos, I got this in my memory. When I began to study at the university, first my degree and then my master's degree and then my PhD, I was clear that I wanted to search for that Filipino past, and the Vino de Cocos. So I began to write a book on the Vino de Cocos because there are documents in the local archives, documents from the 16th, 17th, 18th century. And there were a lot of papers related to the Vino de Cocos production and the Filipinos. I was about to finish the book and I said to myself, I'm writing about a drink that doesn't exist anymore in Mexico, but it exists in the Philippines. So I said, no, I need to go before I finish my book. It was in 2012. I went to the Philippines for the first time. My first connection was Dr. Fernando Realcita. He's an anthropologist at the Ateneo de Manila University. And he said, yeah, come and we can talk and I can introduce you to some people from Tayabas that know the process of making Lambanog. So, it was fantastic. It was a fantastic voyage. I went there to find the origins of Lambanog making. I went to Manila, of course, to Tayabas, but I went to the Visayas. Yes. I went to Bohol. I went to Cebu. I really felt as I were at home.
Yes.
I went to the market.
Yeah.
And I saw the same fruits, the same vegetables. The people of the Philippines are really, really nice. They let me feel as if I was part of the family. They invited me to their home. They were really, really nice. So I began to note, as you maybe, the things in common that we have in gastronomy, but in culture. And I was in this celebration, Flores de Mayo, and I said to myself, oh my God, the decoration of this church and the people, I could see that in Mexico, I said to myself, in Oaxaca, for example, or Chiapas. And that's why I decided to come back to the Philippines. The Lambanog making was my point, but not only. My book, El Vino de Cocos en Nueva España, or Lambanog in Spain, I tell about how the Filipinos came first, how did they establish in the haciendas, how did they make contracts with the Spaniards, how did they make the Lambanog, how the Lambanog was the first distilled beverage in Mexico. And the documents say, after the Lambanog making, we have the first mezcals made from the Filipino still. I demonstrated step by step how the Vino de Cocos made possible the producing of the first mezcals.
Is it actually called Filipino steel?
The apparatus, yes.
And that's the same apparatus that they use to make mezcal?
The first mezcals that we found on the western part of Mexico are made still today with the Filipino steel. The Filipino style, the Filipino steel, consists of this wooden trunk, and another one, we called it Alembic Arabe, like Arabian steel, which is made with metal. You have these two apparatus. They serve for distillation of beverages, but they are really different and from different cultures.
The reason why I found out about Lambanog in the first place is because my dad specifically has this memory that my grandfather was drinking Lambanog. And then I saw an article about how it helped mezcal and was sort of the precursor for mezcal in Mexico. And I was like, wait a minute, Lambanog, that's what my grandfather used to drink. And I was like, well, I want to find out what Lambanog tastes like. When I was in the Philippines, one of the specific things that I knew I wanted to do was to find Lambanog in the Philippines, because it's not easily found in the US. It's so hard to find in the US. And as it turns out, I don't know if you experienced this when you were in the Philippines, but it's not easy to find in the Philippines either.
I think that you need to know somebody from the place. Yeah, it's not really easy.
So when you started talking about Lambanog and this connection with Mexico, I was like, oh yeah.
There is somebody from Colima who is actually producing Lambanog. Once again, he called his bottle La China Mestiza. There is a story of a woman in Colima. Her name was Francisca Marta. She was the owner of an hacienda, and she produced Vino de Cocos.
Was she Filipina?
She was born from a Filipino and a native woman from Colima. But in the documents, she was considered as India China, like Chinese Indian. Because, some aspect of the migration of the China or the Manila Galleon is that the crown didn't allow women to come in the Manila Galleon to avoid prostitution or something like that. So that's why we don't find many women that were born in the Philippines that went to New Spain. So she was born in Colima. But she was considered Filipina because of his father that was from the Philippines. I'm really honored that my book inspired that person from Colima who is producing now Vino de Cocos, because he said, we need to reactivate the heritage.
What I really appreciate about what you're sharing with me is that because of what you're sharing that with the Mexican community. How aware are Mexicans to the connection with the Philippines?
Not really. When you mention the word Philippines to people in Mexico, normally they think of Manny Pacquiao, because boxing in Mexico is really important, is very popular. When I went to the Philippines, many people asked me about Márquez, because Márquez is a boxer. But I didn't know, because I'm not really a fan of boxing. Yeah. Márquez and Manny Pacquiao, they are rivals. When I was a kid, I remember that my mother used to tell me, that in the Philippines, they have Spanish names and they are Christians. She used to tell me about Imelda Marcos because she was famous at that time, and the shoes of Imelda Marcos. In Mexico, they don't really think of the Philippines as a cultural country really near from Mexico, from the cultural experience. Or they didn't really know about the Philippine heritage. And I'm not pretty sure that in the Philippines, they know about the Mexican heritage.
I agree with you. I think that a lot of Filipinos don't realize the strong connection that there is with Mexicans. And it's the same even in the US. Like Filipinos and Mexicans are very connected culturally. And they're like, oh, isn't that neat? We have so many similarities, ha ha ha. But they don't actually realize there's this big connection called the Spanish colonization and all of that history, the actual physical history of going between the Philippines and Mexico. Like that, I also didn't know. The whole Manila Galleons, that's a whole part of history that we're not really familiar with in the Philippine culture and how that could tie us together with Mexico. But it absolutely does. I was in Puerto Vallarta. I had a little bit of an idea that there may be some history there as it relates to Filipinos, but I didn't do enough digging to see exactly how much.
So you went to Puerto Vallarta, but you didn't go to Barra de Navidad?
No.
Which was really close. There are two monuments, one in Manila, in Plaza Mexico, and one in Barra de Navidad for the commemoration of the expedition of Miguel López de Legazpi. He sailed away from Barra de Navidad, 1564. He and Andrés de Urdaneta. So they started in Barra de Navidad. They arrived in the Philippines the next year. And then there is the Tornaviaje, the back trip from Manila to Acapulco in 1565. It began there. I think that the answer to that forgotten history is because the connection between Mexico and the Philippines stopped in the year 1815 when Mexico was in the independence process. From then on, you have in the Philippines the Spanish administration, but the administration was direct to Spain. Mexico was forgotten. When the Philippines began at the end of the 19th century, its independence process from Spain, Mexico was forgotten. Mexico has stopped the Manila Galleon voyages in the year 1815. Maybe in the Philippine memory, they got independence from Spain. Then there comes the United States administration, etc. But Mexico was really far. So they don't remember the connection with Mexico. The same thing with Mexico. When we got our independence in 1821, but then we forgot the Philippines. Sure. We have a long 19th century with a lot of problems with the Republic, but the Philippines was left away. I think that's the reason why Philippines is not really in the memory or the recent memory of our country.
What is the presence of Filipinos in the Mexican community?
The intermingling that happened during the 17th century. I was talking about between 5,000 and 20,000 Filipinos that arrived in New Spain and then stayed there. And that was 17th century. And then in the 18th century, we find really few Filipinos that come in the galleon because of the politics of the crown that prohibited coming from the Philippines. So what we have in the 18th century is that the Filipinos that stayed here married to local women, and then we cannot identify them as Filipinos in the 19th century when Mexico was independent. The heritage is there, but we cannot recognize them in the last names, for example, because many Filipinos had Christian names, Spanish names. Some of them had Filipino names, some other names, but really few. The majority of the Filipinos that arrived here had Christian names, Spanish names. So we cannot identify them during 18th or 19th century by their names because of that reason.
I interviewed a woman who's a teacher in Yuma, Arizona, which is very close to the border of Mexico. She asks her students to record oral histories with their families. And so they'll go and they'll ask, so where do we come from? And she says that these kids will come back to her and present their reports, and many of them who think that they're pure Mexican, they say, we had no idea that we were part Filipino.
Really?
Yes, it completely blew my mind when she told me that. In Yuma, there's a very large community of Filipino migrants that came from the Philippines, initially were in California, to work the farms, and then they'll migrate. It just depends on where the work is. And so a lot of these migrant farmers who are Filipino then will stay and marry into a Mexican family, and then they have their children and they're part Filipino, and their kids have no idea because they think that they're Mexican. I can imagine that's probably a lot of what happens, is that, you know, one culture kind of takes over, especially, the Philippines is so far away. So when you're surrounded by Mexico and Mexican culture and all of the community, I can imagine that would be a part of why that might have also been forgotten. I feel your sense of like joy in finding
Of course.
these stories.
Maybe I had Philippine ancestors. I don't know.
I know. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation, and have a nice trip to Mexico City.
Thank you.
Bye, Ted.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh my God, this is so amazing. She's amazing. She like brought out the best in me.